What was the legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar? This becomes even more relevant because just last week we saw the Congress and the BJP members jostling each other on the floor of the House. And the discussion was on celebrating the 75 years of India's constitution, the drafting committee of which, as we are all aware, was headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Now, today, both the BJP and the Congress claim that they are very, very positive about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. But let us also realize the fact that as long as he was alive, both the BJP and, in fact, not the BJP, but the Bharatiya Janata Sangh, which was the predecessor party to the BJP, as well as the Congress, they did not hold him in very high esteem. In fact, they were quite opposed to him, and that was clear in both their actions and their words. And till the time that he died, they were bitter critics of Dr. Ambedkar. In fact, in 1952, Dr. Ambedkar was roundly defeated by the Congress candidate, Narayan Saboda Kajrolkar, who actually had been an earlier assistant to Dr. Ambedkar. In fact, in 1952, he lost the election. And in 1954, he wanted to stand for the by-elections from Bandara. And this time, Dr. Ambedkar was third in the hustings. All these things have been documented by Dr. Shashi Tharoor in his book, Dr. Ambedkar Alive. And Shashi Tharoor actually goes on to aver that Ambedkar was given a seat in the Rajya Sabha courtesy the Congress, the point which he makes. And he also says that Dr. Ambedkar did not quite realize how popular the Congress was at that point of time, and that the Congress actually represented the popular mood in the country. And he goes on to say that some of the pronouncements of Dr. Ambedkar were actually not very popular with the people, even including those in the reserved constituency from where he had stood for elections. In fact, let us go back slightly into history. The fact is that Nehru had inducted both Dr. Ambedkar and Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, his ideological rivals, in the national cabinet, because the first cabinet was not really a Congress cabinet, it was the national cabinet. And Dr. Ambedkar had been given the law portfolio. It is also a fact that he was not very happy with the law portfolio because he felt that during the Viceroy's regime, that is when he was a member of the Viceroy's Council, he had been given charge of both PWD and Labour. And these are very important ministries. And he had made a significant contribution because it was also during his time as a member of the Viceroy's Council that the 8.5% reservation in services had started. So it appears that Nehru had promised that when the planning commission or the planning department would be created, Dr. Ambedkar would be given an important position there, a ministerial position there, because he was already a minister. But this did not happen, and especially after the Constitution was adopted on the 26th January 1950, but actually the work had been completed by November itself, Ambedkar actually felt that there was not too much work for him. Ambedkar had piloted the Hindu Code Bill and was very keen that it should be passed, and had agreed to even dilute some of the provisions and in fact break up the bill into two bills to get greater acceptability. But Nehru was of the opinion that the time was perhaps not right for the Hindu Code Bill. He felt that there was too much opposition to it. In fact, Nehru wrote to him on 10th August 1951 saying that the time is not ripe for the Hindu Code Bill because there's a lot of opposition both inside and outside the House. In fact, the opposition to the bill was led by none else than Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee of the Bharatiya Janata Sangh. Ambedkar therefore said that and a month later, in September, Dr. Ambedkar wrote to Nehru and said that, look, if the Hindu Code Bill is not coming through, then I think it is best that I be relieved from this cabinet because I see no useful purpose of remaining in the cabinet. So when he resigned, there was naturally a lot of uproar on the political front, and Dr. B.C. Roy raised this concern with Nehru. But Nehru, in his characteristic style, replied to the Chief Minister of West Bengal, said that the cabinet is not unduly weakened by Dr. Ambedkar's departure. So that is what he had to say on Dr. Ambedkar's quitting the cabinet in 1951. And as I told you earlier, in 1952, Ambedkar stood for elections but lost to a Congress candidate, not just in 52 but also in 54. But the important point to note is that the reservations, the reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, the 15% reservation for the SCs and 7.5% reservation of STs became possible because of Dr. Ambedkar's insistence on Articles 15.4 and 16.4, which were incorporated into the Constitution, which authorized the central and the state governments to make reservations for members of the SCs and the STs. But Mr. Nehru's position on the issue of reservations was always quite clear. He accepted it as a political compromise. But even as late as 1963, in fact, his letter in September or October 1963 to the chief ministers, he said that he is principally opposed to reservations because it is not meritocratic and it does lead to inefficiency in standards, and that he does not want second-rate people in the governance. That is what he said in 1963, and it's on record. And 3 decades later, when the discussion on the Mandal Commission was happening, when VP Singh had introduced the Mandal Commission recommendations for adoption in the Lok Sabha, Rajiv Gandhi opposed it. It's on record. I mean, one can see the records of the debate in the Lok Sabha. Interestingly, Rajiv Gandhi used the word Pandit Ji for Nehru and Raja Saheb for VP Singh, and VP Singh did not object to being called Raja Saheb. That's the important point. So in 2024, nobody would like to address anyone as Pandit Ji or Raja Sahib. These are beyond the ken of political discourse today because mobilization has changed entirely. Political mobilization techniques have changed entirely after the implementation of the Mandal Commission. I would also like to mention about the claim that is being said today that it was the Congress denied BJP the Bharat Ratna. Congress denied him a position in the Central Hall of Legislature in terms of a portrait. But 7 years after the Bharat Ratna had been given by VP Singh, and after the large portrait of Ambedkar, of Dr. Ambedkar, had been installed in the Lok Sabha, the then ideologue of the BJP, Arun Shourie, who later on became a minister twice in the BJP regimes, wrote a polemical book called Worshipping False Gods. And it talked about the facts about Ambedkar which have not been brought to light. And he, in fact, portrays Ambedkar as a collaborator of the British Raj, a quote-unquote collaborator of the British Raj. It's on record. I'm not making this up. You can see the book. Check it out for yourself. That is what the blurb of the book also said. Therefore, you see, at one level, what the ideologues of the Congress in terms of Shashi Tharoor and what Arun Shourie is saying about Dr. Ambedkar is not different. It is just that today, the Congress may not want to put Tharoor's book in the forefront, and the BJP, of course, would not like to put Shourie's book in the forefront as far as discussion on Dr. Ambedkar is concerned. There's also a lot of discussion that, Dr. Ambedkar opposed 370. Yes, he opposed 370, but it was his opposition was sui generis. He said that, look, and in fact, let's get that context also, right? While Nehru had referred the Kashmir issue, Jammu and Kashmir issue to the UN, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee said that it cannot be treated differently from any other state in the country. He said there cannot be two nizams in one desh. Ek desh mein ek nizam. That is what was the slogan of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee at that point of time. And what Dr. Ambedkar had said was that, well, if there is a plebiscite, then the plebiscite should be held separately for the Kashmir region and separately for the Jammu and Ladakh region, because if there's a plebiscite held for the whole whole state of Jammu and Kashmir, then you will be pushing unwilling Hindus of Jammu and Buddhists of Ladakh into Pakistan. And in case Kashmir opts to be in India, then it's absolutely wonderful. But if Kashmir opts for Pakistan, that's also fine. But at least once and for all, the entire focus of our defense and foreign policy will not be on Kashmir. It will be on other aspects. And in fact, he said that because of our obsession with Kashmir, we're forgetting the Hindus of East Pakistan, whose suffering is as much, if not more. In fact, the sufferings of the Namsudra community, which had been left behind in East Bengal, continue to resonate very strongly. And that's a fact which Dr. Ambedkar drew our attention to at that point of time. Now, what I'd like to conclude by saying that, let us not look here and there about Ambedkar. Let's read Dr. Ambedkar. He's a very powerful writer. And it's rather unfortunate that while doing my master's in history at JNU, we did not read much about Ambedkar. I read about Ambedkar much later. But right from his first book on, the address which he was supposed to have given to the Jat Paat Todak Mandal in Lahore, which could never be given, annihilation of caste, waiting for a visa, his thoughts on Pakistan, his thoughts on linguistic states in the country, his thoughts on Maharashtra, his thoughts on several things, including having Hyderabad as the winter capital of this country, having Sanskrit as a national language. And he wrote a lot. He wrote very extensively. And I think it's important that we read Dr. Ambedkar to form our conclusions on Dr. Ambedkar rather than look into the political slugfest about him. And in 1943, he made a remarkable speech. And in that speech, he said, and I quote, "No great man really does his work by crippling his disciples by forcing on them his maxims and conclusions. What a great man does is to awaken them to a vigorous and various exertion of their faculties. A pupil takes his guidance from his master, but does not have to accept his conclusions." It's a very important point, that a pupil must absorb from his master the guidance that the master wants to give, but is not duty bound to accept whatever he says. And finally, he says that this is what the pupil should say to the master: "You awakened me to myself, and for this I thank you. You awakened me to myself, and for this I thank you. The master is not entitled to any less, and the disciple is not bound to give any more." This is the essential Dr. Ambedkar. So let's read him and not jostle in the parliament. The best tribute to Dr. Ambedkar would be to read his work and form our own independent conclusions. Thank you.